What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sponge Plugin Programming. In today's episode, we are going to be adding in a second skill, as well as cleaning up some code from last episode. So let's get right on into this by creating a brand new Java file for the woodcutting skill. Now, we're just going to create this new class within our skills package here, the one containing the skill interface as well as our mining skill. So, new Java class. Wood cutting skill. Now, before we get to adding any code in here, I want to go to our build.gradle file that we have right here and update our API version to 7.1.0-snapshot. As well as that, make sure you are using the correct Forge and SpongeForge version for Minecraft 1.12.2, and I will have the version that I am using in this video in the description below. And one more thing I want to change here is within our main class here, is I want to add a description to our @plugin annotation. So description equals, and just whatever description we want, make sure we put that comma at the end. I'm just going to make it super simple and do skills for Sponge. Now, with all of that out of the way, we can get into our woodcutting skill class, and this is going to be extremely easy because all we really need to do is just copy what we have within our mining skill class and paste it into our woodcutting skill class. Now, obviously, there are going to be a couple of things we need to change in here, such as the constructor name should now be woodcutting skill to match the name of the class. The getSkillName function should return woodcutting. And our values need to be changed to match the woodcutting skill. And I'm just going to put a single value in here for now, and it's going to be Minecraft::log. And let's reward 5 experience for that. And that's all that we need to do within there, so let's head on over to our skill class to make a small addition. And that small addition is just adding in the woodcutting skill, or adding the string woodcutting to our skills array. And this must match the name of the skill that we just created. Now, finally, we can get to our skill manager class here in order to initialize our woodcutting skill. And we will do this right below the declaration for the mining skill object. Private woodcutting skill, and make sure we import that. And now we also need to initialize it, so woodcutting skill. We're just doing this within our skill manager constructor, same place as our mining skill. Woodcutting skill equals new woodcutting skill. And then once we have that initialized, we also want to go ahead and set up the configuration file with those new values for the woodcutting skill. And again, just right below the mining skill setup configuration we have here, we will do woodcutting skill.setup config and pass in the skills config node. And another addition I want to make here is I want to go and add a function that will just make our lives a little bit easier when we go about giving experience to a player in a certain skill. We will create a function called private void give exp, and this will take in 4 arguments: a player object that I will call player, an account object that I'm going to call account, a string for the skill name, and lastly, an integer representing the EXP amount to award to the player. And what we want to do in here is just copy what we have here, where we are setting the skill experience, as well as checking for a level up. And of course, we're going to need to change the hard-coded skill name to the passed-in skill name in both of these spots. And where it says mining EXP amount, let's change that to just EXP amount. And in our check for level up function, we just need to change the hard-coded mining skill name to the passed-in skill name. And that is all we have to do for that give exp function. That'll just make it so we don't have to repeat a bunch of code over and over again. Now onto our onBlock break event. I want to go about adding another argument to this using something called the @first annotation. And it looks something like this: @first And what we want to get is player. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to grab the first player that is passed from this event. And since that's doing that for us, we no longer need to check to see if a player is present within this if statement like we have here. So we can just go right ahead and delete that if statement. And as well as that, since we are grabbing the player object from within the argument using this @first annotation, we no longer need to create a player object within the code, so that line of code can also go away. Now, the cool thing about the @first annotation is that if a player is not found as being a cause of a change block event, in this case a change block event.break, then it will not be called. So since that's the case, as I said earlier, we no longer need to check to see if a player is present. And while we're at it, let's format this nicely. Now, another thing we want to do in here is we want to change the way we are grabbing the block name. And all I want to do is right after we do get state, I also want to do .get type, like so. Now, I also like to point out that the way that our current code works for grabbing the block name, it does not take into account the different variants of blocks. So for example, an oak log and a spruce log will be seen as the same exact thing in the eyes of the code we have here. Now in a later video I will be going over how to work with variants, but for now we're just going to work with what we have here. Next we want to go about removing some more code in here, such as this integer for the mining EXP amount that is no longer needed, as well as this if statement all the way down to the bottom of the function. And we're going to replace this with a for loop for string skill name skill dot skills. Now for those of you that are not familiar with this, what this is going to do for us is it's going to loop through each string within the skills array, this one right here. In each iteration it's going to store a different value in the skill name, so we can go ahead and do whatever we want to do within the body of the for loop. When it gets to the end of that array, it will just break out of the loop and continue doing all the code that's below it. Now in here, the first thing we want to do is grab an experience amount. So int exp amount equals skills config dot get node, and the node that we want to get is the skill name followed by the block name. And from that node, we want to grab an integer, which will be the experience amount. And we can do that using getInt. And one more thing I want to show off here, which is extremely useful, is the getInt, or all of these getter functions for nodes, allows you to pass in a parameter as a default. And I'm going to default this to 0. Now what this is going to do for us is if no integer is found at this node, it's just going to set the exp amount value to our default here, which is 0. If an integer is found at that configuration node, we want to check for that if exp amount is greater than 0. And if that is the case, we then want to give some experience using our handy give exp function. Takes in a player, in this case the player who broke the block, which we are grabbing from the @first annotation here, as well as the account for that player, the name of the skill name, and the exp amount that we just grabbed from the configuration file, just right up here, right up above. And we also want to send them a function, or excuse me, a message, player.send message. And this can be whatever you want. I'm just going to send a message saying you broke, followed by the block name, worth, and we're going to make this fancy by doing some gold text, exp amount, and cap that off with exp. And lastly, we want to break out of this entire for loop because there's no point of continuing iterating through the skills array if we already found what we need to find. Now with that done, we can build our plugin and test it out in game. Now once we're in game, if we break some logs, what we should see is that we broke the log and followed by the experience amount that we get for breaking that, the one that we set within the configuration file. Now if you notice, if we go over to the spruce logs here, it's going to do the same exact thing because like I said, the code that we are currently using to grab the block name does not take into account the block variant. And again, I will go over how to do that in a later video. And if we move on to the coal here, just to show off that our mining skill still works, you can see that we are still rewarded with the 10 experience that we have set within the configuration file as well. With all of that working out, that will conclude this video. If you're interested in helping out the channel, there are a few links to do so in the description below. And if this video was helpful to you, please hit that like button. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.